welcome to the Autism 360 podcast, the 360 Method, a podcast where we talk about everything Autism 360. Each week we're going to be catching you up with what's going on in the program, chatting with different team members and talking about all things mindset, as well as exploring relevant ideas that autism parents think about. I'm your host, Ella Bailey, and every week I'm luckily enough to be joined by our mindset coach extraordinaire, Renea Tate. Hello, Renee.
Thank you, Ella. Hi.
And we are here to welcome you, our lovely listeners. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Before we get started, I want to encourage you to reach out to us. We really want to hear from you, want to have your questions to answer here on the podcast and hear your feedback. So please do drop us a line at hello@autism360.com. We would really love to hear from you. Some of our awesome listeners have already reached out, asked us some questions, give us some thought-provoking comments to be able to address on the podcast, and that makes things super relevant to everything that's going on with our community. So please do get in touch. I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose land we live and work, and from where this podcast is being broadcast today, and give respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. In addition, this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice. If you're worried about yourself or about your child, please do reach out to a medical or allied health professional. So today, what are we chatting about, Renee?
So today we're talking about capacity and how to manage our capacity, or how to help our children, not just ourselves, but our beautiful children, and how to help them through that. So Ella, I feel like this is one that you would have a lot of experience in, and probably something that you do get asked about a lot.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think there can be a real disconnect between what is a parent's neurotypical understanding of capacity and what a child should be able to cope with, and what our kiddos on the spectrum or neurodiverse children can understand. I'll just briefly define those terms that I'm going to be using to explain what we're talking about today. So a neurotypical experience is what we might term a normal experience, or what would used to have been called a normal experience. It's an experience that's kind of a typical way that somebody would engage with the world, a mainstream experience of the world. And any neurodiverse experience is any experience really that differs from that norm in some way. So it could be somebody who's experiencing autism. It could be somebody who has ADHD. It could be somebody who has a sensory processing disorder. It's just a catch-all term to refer to somebody whose experience of the world is in some way atypical. So that's how I'm going to be using it. So I guess there's a fundamental disconnect between a neurotypical parent's expectation of what a child can cope with, and what might be the actual day-to-day capacity of our children's of our neurodiverse children's expectation. So I think that that's a lot of what's underpinning some of the disconnect between parents and children, and not understanding why our children can't cope with, for example, and this is something I hear a lot, you might hear this too, Renee, but at their age I could do that. Mm-hmm. Or at their age I was whatever it might be, at their age I could X, Y, and Z, and not understanding why their child can't have the same experience that they might have had. So there's a really popular and kind of well-versed, well-past kind of metaphor or theory that we can use to explain what we mean when we say capacity, and that is called spoon theory. So you might have heard this used in kind of disability literature or disability research. And the idea is that every day we wake up, assuming the quality of our rest has been good, we wake up with a full jar of spoons, and some people naturally wake up with less spoons in their jar, some people wake up with more, and that those spoons are standing for that person's energy reserves for the day. And so energy looks like not just physical energy, but emotional and cognitive energy as well. And each spoon represents the certain amount of energy that a task takes. So, for example, in the morning, I might be a really non-morning person. So I wake up with a full jar of spoons, but it takes me 4 spoons of expended energy just to kind of get out the door. But Renee, as I suspect may be the case, is a delightful, full of energy presence in the morning, and it only takes her 1 spoon to bounce out of bed and embrace the day. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes, I think I'm guilty of that one.
I knew it.
Yes, I but I always sort of think, well, just say I am a morning person. I think that does help.
That's true.
So,
yes, absolutely. And maybe that would then reduce my spoon usage in the mornings. Right. There you go.
Mindset,
yeah. Exactly. So that's what it might look like to expend spoons. And so we can extend this metaphor to understanding, okay, well, what is our child doing during the day that's taking up their spoons, that is expending all these little chunks of energy, and that means that at a certain time of the day, at a certain point in the day or whatever, somebody's placing a demand on them in some way that they're then not able to cope with. And that's when we see things like dysregulated behavior, meltdowns and that sort of thing. So it really helps in this kind of situation to kind of take a 3-step approach. But I want to check in. Renee, does spoon theory make sense? Does you feel like it applies? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think it's a really good way of looking at it and understanding that, because when you start thinking about that, you think, it's like it makes sense that some people have run out at a certain time of the day. All of a sudden they can't cope, and we're not sure why, or why were they able to cope with that yesterday but not today. Yes. And it's just, I think, a really good metaphor for understanding what happens to us. And we all can relate to that on some level. We all hit that point where we've run out of spoons at some point and we need to replenish. So it's a really good explanation, Ella.
Okay, great. I'm glad that it kind of makes sense across the board. And I think there's a helpful sort of 3-step way that I would suggest a parent kind of engages with the idea of their child's capacity, and you can use the spoon theory to help you understand that and grapple with it. The first one is, what does your child find easy or hard in their day? As parents, and especially as parents of kiddos who require extra support in some way, I think a lot of us have a good understanding of our child's strengths, our child's areas that need growth, and what in their day is the hard parts, the easy parts, the bits they need support, or as described by spoon theory, the parts that need, require extra spoons to get through, the parts that are replenishing their spoons, etc. So I would really say take a step back, look at your child's day, work out, where are my spoony patches where they need extra support? Where are the parts where it's not taking up so many spoons? And work out, of these activities, which are the most kind of spoon energy expensive ones and which ones are less so. It's just a really good idea to get the lay of the land in terms of, my kiddo, this is just an example, my kiddo really struggles with the fine motor required to do something like handwriting. And I know that on Tuesday mornings they do an hour and a half of handwriting. And so that means that on a Tuesday, more of the spoons are going to be depleted by the time our kiddo gets to lunchtime than they would typically be, right? So we're thinking, our spoon jar is far less full at this point in a day than it might be on another day where that particularly energy expensive activity is not going on. So take a step back, get a sense of the lay of the land, the lay of how your child's capacity is being consumed throughout the day, and kind of get a baseline of where we're working from. And it's interesting, once parents start to critically engage with this sort of thing, how they start to reflect upon their own energy consumption in this way. Do you notice that parents learn from what they're doing in the program with their kids to apply it to themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for me, I remember having those moments where I'd get home and go, I just need a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Sit down. That was like my, adding some spoons. So I can, I think all parents, we all can relate to these things. And I think it does definitely help make it a bit clearer of what's going on for our children.
I love it. Some spoon replenishing cups of tea. Absolutely. We love it.
Yeah.
And so once we've got a sense of the lay of the land, we can then figure out, okay, well, what is our ratio of demands to deposits during the day? So I'm bringing in a kind of that metaphor of taking away spoons, but then also depositing back in spoons. So, for example, we know that, say for me, getting out of bed in the morning, that demands my spoons. It takes them away. But then, say during my commute, I listen to my favorite podcast. I get to sit, look out the window of the train, look at the trees, listen to my favorite podcast, spoon deposits, spoons back in the jar. Okay, great. So now we understand how that part of the morning has impacted my capacity to cope with the demands of the rest of the day. So where is your child at? What are your child's ratio of demands to deposits? And I'll give you a big clue on this one. If your child isn't coping with their day, their demands are outstripping their deposits. That's a really easy, you're getting a call from school at lunchtime saying they've got into a fight in the playground because they can't cope, or they're getting home from school and they're this whirlwind of sort of hyperactive, stressed energy, and you just think, what's going on here? It's because they haven't had enough energy giving, capacity building experiences or activities during their day compared to what's being demanded of them during the day. And I think it's hard for parents sometimes to grapple with the fact or to grapple with understanding that ratio, because there's this belief that children should just know. They should just be able to cope with X because I was able to cope with X because that's what children cope with. And I would certainly say that, yes, of course, there are sociocultural expectations about what people are able to do at different developmental stages. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you expect of your child. If your child can't cope, your child can't cope. And you expecting them to do something different doesn't magically build up their capacity. What builds up their capacity and increases their ability to cope is doing these activities that replenish their spoons, that give them energy, that help them to feel like they have more to give. And I think we're all familiar with that. Renee's obviously a cup of tea kind of girl. I'm a walk around the block with my dog and a podcast kind of girl. And I think as parents, we get pretty good at knowing those things about our children, about what's going to help them to cope with getting through, maths tutoring. They can get through maths tutoring if they have a little bit of zone out time with, an Apple and their iPad beforehand, but they can't get through maths tutoring if we try and get them to do their homework beforehand. And that's, just an example. What do you feel is applicable in that, Renee?
I think it also helps understand why does my child behave all day at school and then gets home and has this massive meltdown. Yes. I think those things really help you go, wow, they've literally run out of spoons at that point and they have worked so hard. And then, I've got to that point in the afternoon where I just don't have anything left. So absolutely, I think it's looking at what can I do to replenish that, just like we would with a phone being recharged. Totally. I need to plug myself back into those things that help me feel good again, so that I can be at my best. And, not only our children need to be aware of those things, or we need to understand that for our children, but also for ourselves, because I think there's something in that for everyone to just be aware of those things. And I think if you, as you said, if you identify what those things are that help replenish your child, and be aware of that. Awareness is a big part of the solution for anything, but just being aware of what those things are, it's really going to make life a lot easier to go, let them go and have that time to replenish and recharge, and then they're going to be so much more cooperative for the rest of the day or with whatever else is going on. So I think it's a really good a really important one. And the other thing I think is to be aware of is comparing not only to ourselves or what they should be able to do. You know, should's a bit of a dangerous word, because whenever we should ourselves, we're sort of making something wrong. So yes, you know, our child could deal with those things better, but I think the other part is comparing to other children and thinking, well, why do these children, they can cope with this and my child can't? And you know, that comparison is something that I really, it's just so dangerous. I think sometimes it's okay to sort of gauge where should my, you know, well, where will my child, you know, do I need to get them checked, or is there something that they're not, you know, dealing with? But I think just be careful about the comparisons, because it steals our joy. There's a really good quote, comparison is the thief of joy. And I think it's important to just understand our children, help fill them up, but don't compare them too much to where other people are at, because, you know, it's like you don't really know what that other child's going through or what they're like in other ways or what life has in store for them. So just, I think that's just something to be aware of as well around that. But I love that theory, Ella. I think it's a really, you know, helpful topic. And I think the other thing to be feeding our children is what they're doing well at.
Yes.
Like that positive reinforcement and encouragement, those sort of things to me, I think really help like replenish their spoon stocks. Like rather than, oh, you're not doing that, what about, you know, you're doing so well at this and you've done a great job today managing that, or just really build them up. I think life can be hard enough for us. The world will knock us down in so many ways every day. So I think as parents, just so much positive reinforcement and encouragement. I don't think that you can go overboard with that. I think those things really help replenish that supply as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love a good gold star to give me a couple of spoons at the end of the day. I think everybody does.
I think so. And once we get that, sometimes that's all we need to really keep
to power
going.
on.
Yeah,
that's right. Absolutely. We've got an awesome question here from Sejun in Emerald. So Sejun says, my child is so much more relaxed and happy during school holidays. It seems like he just wants to stay home all the time and we would never leave the house if it was up to him. What should I do? I hear this quite a bit, you know, and I think I guess there's a number of ways that I would start. Renee, did you want to add anything before I go on my rant, go on my TED Talk?
Well, look, I think that I can relate to this. My children are a little bit the same, I have to say, and sometimes I think, there's that comparison. I wasn't allowed to just lay around when I was a child. I had to be out doing things all the time.
Yep.
But it is a bit of a different world these days, and I think that I think it is their time to have a bit of downtime to recharge their batteries, replenish their spoons,
yep.
And maybe if we can look at it that way, it does help us to understand that. So it certainly makes sense, doesn't it, to use the holidays to replenish, and so we can get through the next term and all the pressures that come with that for children. What about you, Ella?
Yeah, so the way that I like to think of holidays, especially when we think about school and learning as really our children's full-time job, is during the school term, weekends refill our jar really nicely. During school holidays, we're building a bigger jar. We're building a bigger jar by fully resting, by fully allowing our child to let go of everything that they've been carrying around in their little bodies, all the tension, everything that they've been pushing themselves to engage with all term, and just having a big old flop, you know? And so I like to think of school holidays in those terms. I totally understand, Sojun, that it can be frustrating. You want to, or you need to be out and about. Life continues in school holidays, as much as kids might be shocked by that. And I think it can be frustrating. You know, we've got things we need to get done. Our kiddo's really resistant. We're just going to the supermarket. It's not a big deal. Totally understand. Life's got to get done. And my thought is that in this sort of circumstance, really examine the why. Really examine, okay, well, what is pushing my kid to want to be this kind of cocooned? What is pushing my kid to want to stay home and feel this need to really kind of hibernate? during the school holidays? Is there something going on that's kind of chronically depleting your child's spoons in a way that means that by the school holidays, he's so done, he's so spent that he doesn't even want to leave the house? I think there's a really interesting and kind of something that's really fundamental to my practice book written called The Explosive Child by Dr. John Green. And his kind of big catchphrase is, if they can, they will. And if a child isn't doing something, it's because they can't. It's because that there's something in them, there's something that's holding them back from being able to engage in a way that we would want to, that makes them kind of live their life to their fullest. So I really want you to engage with that. Chat with your kiddo about why this is happening, about how they're feeling, about what's going on at school. Are they feeling like, they want to hide away from the world? Engage with that. Don't try and push it away until you can really understand what's going on for him. And I would certainly say, especially in these post-COVID days, we've really gotten good at making home fun. We've got everything can be delivered, everything can be brought to us. And we've made our homes these really reinforcing, really kind of everything at your fingertips kind of places. And I think more so than lots of other population groups, our kids have really bought into that. They sort of have all their needs met at home. Why would we want to go out when there's, X, Y, and Z at home? So think about the kind of reinforcement value of leaving the house versus staying in the house. See if you can set yourself up for success a little bit better in terms of placing demands, and engage with him about the why behind that behaviour. See if you can see what's driving that, would be my thoughts.
Yeah, and I think, look, I mean, I had this situation with my 17-year-old last week, and she is very similar. She works and she's doing year 11 and she has tutoring, and so it's very intense, the term. And then, as soon as she can lie and relax, that's what she seems to only want to do. I did say to her, I said, come on, let's go for a walk, and did still encourage her to get out and do some things. And I think that's the key, is like encouraging them without it becoming a battle, but don't give up on saying, come on, let's go and have a nice walk. And I think the more that we do those things, the more our children start to realize that, oh, it is nice actually to get out and do something or do things here and there. So I wouldn't say, I think it's important to still encourage them to get out and keep active. But I think, understanding that it's like when we've all had a holiday and a bit of downtime, we are fresh, we are recharged, and we're so much more productive. So rather than seeing it as a negative, maybe it's just changing the way that you see that, and hopefully that helps.
Absolutely. And what I'm seeing there is you showing your daughter a new way of recharging her spoons, right? Like she's got this one way and you're showing her, look, we can do this, and this is going to build you up as well. So I love that. So I think that's going to be it for this week. Did you have any takeaway action points for our parents today, lovely Renee?
As always, just want you to have a think about what is the biggest thing you're taking from today's podcast, and what is the number one thing that you are going to action from that. So it's always important, knowledge is wonderful, but without implementing it, it's not obviously going to make the big difference for you and your family. So what can you implement from that today, even if it's just one thing that you go, okay, I'm going to write down a list of what recharges my child or what replenishes them. So we are proactive around that. Whatever that is, I just want you to have a think about that, get it happening. And as I always say, momentum builds momentum. Start making those small changes. And sometimes it's just those little 1% increases that make the big difference. By the end of the year, you look back and go, wow, we've come a long way. So just make sure you're actioning something from today.
Absolutely. So thank you again for joining us. We will chat with you again next week about another topic relevant to autism parenting. And until then, think 360.